Hello all, James here. Now, Raven was on Ariel Helwani show yesterday where he actually reiterated that he was dealing with early-onset Parkinson's disease. He'd actually mentioned this about a month earlier for, I think, Matt Cardona. Anyway, for some reason, when he mentioned it there, it didn't really get picked up or widely circulated by the wrestling media, but this time on Ariel Helwani's it did. Here's the quote. "I'm content, or basically as content as I've ever been, other than this stupid tremor I got from the Parkinson's. I got early onset Parkinson's, so if you see me tremor, that's why. But other than that, it's I don't think it really touches on enough of my current life to do any damage to it." So at least it's not that bad, at least according to Raven at this point. Quote again, "I'm lucky it hasn't affected me too bad. It's just when I get anxious, the tremor gets worse, or when I'm really tired. And I have a sleep disorder, but look, you've got to pay the piper sometimes. You got to for all the drugs and alcohol and chair shots I took to the head. You got to pay for the damage at some point." When Ariel asked if he thinks the condition was related to his career, the quote was, "Oh, of course, absolutely, yeah." So, immediately, I think of the chair shot heard around the world when Raven was chained to a steel cage and then Tommy Dreamer grabbed a chair and just absolutely lumped him in the head, something around 95, I think. And then, Raven, because his arms were, obviously he couldn't get his arms up, but sort of like when your arms are out or behind your back, as Mick Foley said, actually, with the I Quit match. He said, for whatever reason, you can't brace your body properly to absorb the chair shot like you normally would. So that's one of the reasons that chair shot in particular comes to mind when hearing those quotes. I have more quotes from Ariel Helwani in the interview, but I'm going to leave it there for now. Now, I find it interesting that Raven described the Parkinson's as early onset for a couple of different reasons. Firstly, due to Scott Levy's age. He's actually 61. And early onset Parkinson's is usually defined as seeing the first symptoms before the age of 50, according to the Michael J. Fox Foundation website. So whether he was diagnosed years earlier and never publicly announced it or not, we don't know at this point. But what is important is that if indeed it is early onset and not just regular, the age you start developing symptoms doesn't actually determine how quickly the disease progresses, unlike, say, dementia. In fact, having early onset Parkinson's is weirdly in some way preferable because it's associated with less cognitive decline over the long term and longer survival rates as compared to, once again, I guess you'd call it regular Parkinson's disease. But be that as it may, Raven still has Parkinson's disease, which slows motor progression, causes tremors, muscle stiffness, and balance problems, and it also can contribute to elevated pain levels and tiredness and mood swings and sleep problems and more. It's a really horrible disease that, as Raven would say in another interview with Matt Cardona's crew, that he struggles holding a microphone and it affects his confidence speaking publicly, which then causes anxiety, which then exacerbates the shaking, which makes public speaking more difficult for him these days, which is something that he was very good at for decades in his career. Now, that same interview with Matt Cardona from last month and Matt Cardona's crew actually made headlines last month because it featured like a reel or a short or a clip or whatever featuring Raven recounting a story about some guy that did well on YouTube, but New York, aka WWE, refused to push him. Raven was referring to Zack Ryder, aka Matt Cardona, who he was sat right next to at the time when he was recounting this, and everyone fell about laughing and thought it was hilarious. But then a lot of commenters also watched that and went, "Oh my God, Raven's truly losing it. He's through the looking glass." Now, as somebody who works with Dutch Mantel, and Dutch will be the first to tell you this as well, he's got a terrible memory, especially for names, and he often attributes his forgetfulness to decades of hard bumps and chair shots and everything else like that. And there's absolutely some truth to that as well. But also, I think Dutch was just always forgetful, because I've heard from people in the 90s who used to hang around with Dutch, and he was just as forgetful then as well. Some people just are. I mean, I have no idea what I did the prior video on this channel. I think it was The Undertaker, but normally I don't remember. It's like with every podcast I do, I don't remember anything that I've said on the previous show. So if anybody quotes me something, I said, "Oh, did I say that?" Or anyway, it's one of those things where it's the old one's done and then I move on to the new. And I think some people's thought processes go like that. So in that vein, I think Raven might have been unfairly maligned with what a lot of commentators were sort of accusing him of, and being in like serious cognitive decline, I guess, for his forgetfulness, where once again I could have been in the same position and forgot the exact same thing. Ariel even called Raven Johnny the Body in the introduction to the interview as well, before he corrected himself eventually, or someone corrected him and called him Scotty the Body, recounting Raven's old characters. Now, once again, it could have been CTE, it could have been honest forgetfulness, we won't know. However, I sat opposite Raven for several hours last year for an interview, and I could tell something was absolutely not right with him there. I mean, there were some real health issues beyond the obvious tremors that, it was obvious on camera, it was obvious to me, and keep in mind that what you saw on camera was nowhere near as much as what you saw, from beginning to end, having to deal with him and sort of watching him. But there was definitely some real health issues going on, and they look cognitive as well. So once again, beyond the tremors, there seemed to be cognitive issues going as well. And he had, the 1,000-yard stare. He was struggling to gather his thoughts and just struggling in general through quite a lot of it, whether that's CTE or whether that's cognitive decline due to Parkinson's, or, his self-admitted extracurricular activities throughout the decades. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I'm not there testing and whatever, but it was kind of really obvious and impossible to hide. We had to cut 20 to 30 minutes of that interview out just to aid the flow and basically make Raven look as good as he could look, I guess. But I genuinely thought at the time that interview was unusable, and we weren't going to post it at all. And luckily my editor he worked hours on end to sort of get it somewhat cohesive. And for a number of different reasons, that interview was just a horrible experience all round. Now, there is a reason why I'm saying that. I'm not trying to dump on him unnecessarily. I'll get to the point where it all wraps up toward the end. But back to Ariel's interview. And in the same interview, Raven discusses the litany of injuries that he's still dealing with years after his full-time wrestling career came to an end. So, quote again, "I haven't been on the road a whole lot the last couple of years because in 2022 I had both knees replaced, 2023 I had my shoulder replaced, 2024 I had spinal stenosis flare up, and there's been so much just rehab, and from obviously my association with Stevie Richards, and he's had back problems as well. I know from his experience that he's told me just how bad spinal stenosis and flare-ups can be. So it's just a terrible thing to have to sort of deal with on a day-to-day basis. Then there were comments about Raven's sleep patterns. Parkinson's can affect sleep dramatically, but as best as I understand, Raven has always had asynchronous sleep patterns or an insomnia or whatnot, most likely not helped by, once again, his self-admitted years of drug abuse, concussions, and just partying and staying up all night. Here's his quote. "The only real struggle is the exhaustion from the sleep disorder. There's no..." This quote is from, goodness me, it's from the YouTube transcript thing, so if it's a bit wrong, I'm sorry. "There's no actual term for it, but I've had 8 sleep studies, and basically it's part sleep apnea, part narcolepsy, part little bit of everything. I wear a mask, but what happens is I wake up like 10 to 15 times a night, so then when I wake up for good that day, I'm just as exhausted as when I went to bed. It's better than having cancer, at least. So at least, the silver lining, I guess. I'll get up around 11 or 12, and then I get up around 11, watch TV for an hour or two, and then start the day, and then around 5, I'll take a nap for an hour, and then I'll stay up until 2:30 in the morning." While the sleep stuff may, once again, have been an issue for Raven, whether he was in the business or not, but once again, decades of mistreatment of his body in every way couldn't have helped. Raven's story is one that wrestlers should really take heed from. And this sort of is boiling down to the point I'm trying to make with this entire video. Raven also said himself in the Ariel Helwani interview that he was on the top of people's Deadpool lists, basically lists of wrestlers who are going to drop dead young, or at least way before their time, for many years, and that he's really lucky to be alive considering everything he's put his body through and everything he's put into his body as well. But I think there's a lesson to be learned for today's wrestlers from Raven. While pro wrestling in general is a much cleaner sport than it used to be in, let's say, the 1990s, there are relatively few addicts in the business compared to when wrestlers were shooting Nubane under their tongues just to get through another match, or drinking a bottle of Jack just to get through another match, or just because they liked it. Also keep in mind this, actually, because this is upcoming on the Stevie Richards show on Friday is when I asked Stevie, obviously, or I'm presuming the locker rooms were generally more clean in the 2010s than they were in the 1990s. And I was like, yeah, cleaner, but, it's kind of 50-50 if someone would be messed up in the 2010s in the locker room, or, obviously so, compared to the 1990s where it was even worse. So, once again, the locker rooms are cleaning up on the independent level, and especially in the more professional ranks, but there's still very much an element of that, I guess. Anyway, the wider lesson for wrestlers to take today is that while pro wrestling in general is much cleaner than it was in the 1990s, there are relatively few addicts in the business, etc. The high-risk bumps, on the other hand, seem to be ever on the rise. I mean, we've seen this with a lot of people in AEW. We see this more and more on the indies. There seems to be more, pop-up mud show, deathmatch kind of things happening. There seems to be just as many, if not more, balcony dives and basically just high-risk stuff. And even in just normal matches with no hardcore rules or whatever, there seem to be so many risks being taken completely unnecessarily. I mean, I'll give you some examples. The Tiffany Stratton moonsault onto the floor where Jade Cargill got out the way. I mean, she was always meant to get out the way. And then Tiffany had to be put in concussion protocol for several weeks because she didn't wrestle for several weeks. And I think a match was taken off NXT, one off the WrestlePalooza pay-per-view maybe as well. Then there's the Alabama Slam. That was horrendous on Raw just this past Monday. Kairi Sane gave an Alabama Slam to Io Sky on the apron, and she whacked basically what looked like the back of her neck and could have killed her on the apron. For what? Didn't even go to the finish. And then, like in AEW, there's a million different examples, but like the one I thought of immediately was the Kyle Fletcher clothesline on Adam Cole that saw Adam Cole pretty much just admit that he had to retire due to multiple concussion syndrome. And multiple concussion syndrome seems to be on the rise in wrestling as a whole, despite wrestlers, at least in the big companies, they're wrestling fewer matches than ever, because the problem is that they're not only taking bigger risks, they're taking bigger risks for literally no payoff whatsoever. It's not like it's an injury angle. It's not like it even leads to the finish of a match. Every single one of those 3 incidents I mentioned just then, they were just moves in a sea of moves that some of them would have been fine and some of them would have just been, inordinately high risk for what was basically a match with no high stakes and didn't even lead to the finish. Once again, the reason why I'm mentioning all this is that it seems that people are going to look back on, and this is the problem with when you're young, I guess, or you're in the wrestling bubble too much, you just sort of think it won't happen to you, or you feel like you have to take all these high risks to continually be noticed. But it's something that I figure in 20 years' time, a lot of wrestlers are going to live to regret, to not work smarter. And the reason I'm saying all this, once again, and bringing it to the Raven character and Scott Levy as a person, as a performer, is that he is the perfect example of somebody who is almost a warning. He's a living warning from history. What can happen to your body and what can even happen to your mind if you don't reasonably look after both. It's pro wrestling. Once again, you can't escape injury or bump free or bruise free or anything like that. You're going to get whacks on the head. But once again, there just seems to be way too many risks happening. And Raven, taking so many chair shots to the head, once again, living, he'd probably say a degenerate lifestyle as well, I guess. But, with too many drugs and too much partying over the course of a long time, and basically it's burnt him out. And whether he would have got Parkinson's or not, who knows? But it's he believes that it's a reasonable assumption that he wouldn't be in this position now if he hadn't done all of the ridiculous things, or ill-advised things at least, shall we say, in his career beforehand. We're going to get to another couple of quotes from Ariel, the Ariel Helwani show. Ariel asked Raven if he had any regrets. Oh, I got tons of regrets. Anybody who says they don't have regrets is full of shit. I got tons of regrets. I got tons of things I would have done different, but I didn't. They made me who I am, and I'm happy with who I am. And I would rather be happy with who I am at the end of my life than be happy early in my life and not happy in the end. It's like so many people's lives, they come to misfortune at the end, and that would be the worst thing that could ever happen. I want my golden years to be golden and not shit. So there you go. that is sort of the news, I guess, is that Raven, once he's not announced it, he actually announced it a month before, but nobody picked it up. But Raven has Parkinson's disease. He's attributing that, and of course a lot of other things, to the risks he took in his career over 3 decades, basically. And that's also why I thought I'd make mention of it now as well, because once again, there are a lot of people taking just as ridiculous risks. Maybe people aren't taking chair shots to the head anymore, even though that's kind of creeping back in a tiny bit here and there. A little more in AEW than WWE, but you know, it's still in the indies and that kind of thing. And I just kind of think, well, Raven, you know, Parkinson's, potentially other cognitive issues happening as well, all those injuries, sleep apnea and insomnia, that kind of thing, and he attributes some of that, if not most of that, if not all of that, to the choices he made in wrestling. So once again, it's sort of like a lesson that can be learned from, and he's there to learn from it still. So there you go. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you again soon for the next video.